Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Odd Lots podcast. I'm Joe Weisenthal.
And I'm Tracy Alloway.
Tracy, I was at my cousin's wedding this weekend, and I have a lot of lawyers in my family. And every time
I didn't know that.
Yeah, in my extended family, a lot of lawyers in there. And I'm always asking them like what they do and stuff. Within like 5 seconds of any conversation, I'm like, tell me about trials and like techniques to like sway the jury, et cetera. The stuff I see on TV. I am aware, though, that is actually not that big of a part of many lawyers like day to day.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a lawyer in my family, too, an ex-lawyer, my husband, who did big law, big corporate law. Absolutely hated it and got out of it, luckily. And so I have a feeling in this particular episode, I'm just going to ask a lot of work-life balance questions based on my own experience and my husband's experience.
Yeah.
But it is a huge industry, and it's one of those industries that I think all financial journalism actually doesn't do a good job of covering, along with accounting. So we should talk about it.
We definitely should talk about it. We should talk about it way more than we do. Within the AI conversation specifically, you hear a lot about the prospects of this being either like a force multiplier or a labor reducer, because my understanding is that a lot of like, especially like junior lawyers, they're up all night. What are they like looking for misplaced commas? Because those could be a big deal in contracts, right? And so in theory, and again, Tracy, I'm sure you know way more about this than I do, but in theory, that sort of seems like something AI might be good at. Like, oh no, if the comma is not here and it's there, then that totally changes the definition of this clause or whatever.
There's a famous case involving a comma that did exactly that. So many points to make here. First of all, I am vastly in favor of anything that makes corporate lawyers' lives slightly more efficient and happier. So AI could be useful here. But I also wonder, the lawyer profession, they have things like templates and standard forms and stuff like that. So I also wonder how much of an improvement AI will be here. So I'm excited to talk about it.
You know that, Tracy, when they get the AI tools really in place, they're just going to give them more work.
Yeah,
they're like, well, AI,
that's what I suspect.
Yeah, no one's actually.
By the way, I have a lot of stories of like partners calling from their fishing boats on the weekend demanding that junior lawyers go into the office and like fix a comma and things like that.
All right. Well, I'm really excited to say we do have the perfect guest. Someone that I've known for a very long time, someone who just knows about a lot of stuff, someone who is a lawyer. We're going to be speaking with Joel Wertheimer. He's currently at Wertheimer Flater LLP, a civil rights firm here in New York City. He was previously at the White House. He's done big law in the past. He knows a lot about a lot of stuff. He knows a lot about poker. He knows a lot about AI. Someone I think we could just talk to about anything. He knows a lot about elections. He just sort of knows everything. Joel, thank you so much for coming on Odd Lots. Thrilled to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you real quickly tell us like who you are, what do you do, why are we talking to you?
I run my own civil rights law firm. I just partnered up, and we sue the government mostly for violations of civil rights. Sometimes that's false arrest or wrongful convictions. Sometimes that's wrongful removals of kids in, let's say, child services for a shaken baby that was a false accusation, that sort of thing. And we try to get people compensation for the wrongs of their constitutional rights. That's about 80% of what we do.
Personal question. Are civil/criminal lawyers, are they happier than corporate lawyers?
I would say on average, sure, but the distribution is probably pretty wide for each. I do think on the nice thing on the plaintiff side, and it's like I'm my own boss, I get to, determine how much I work, and each extra case is just more money or less money if I decide not to take it. And so I can sort of set my own work-life balance when I do that. And it's constantly a decision of sort of what's the expected value of a case and is it worth it to me in terms of the hours I have to put in.
So let's talk about when you were at Big Law. And, I joked that, people, they're up at 1 a.m. and they're looking at commas. I know that's a little bit of an exaggeration. But
no, it's not. And it really isn't.
Yeah, I guess it's not. And I know that lawyers are really obsessed with billable hours. And I think they even measure things in 10-minute increments.
6 minutes.
6-minute increments.
Yeah.
if you're a junior associate or you enter a law firm, whatever, what is the modal use of your time? What are you mostly doing when you're clocking those 6-minute increments?
Right. So I can only really speak to litigation.
Sure.
Because, corporate, you're, I think, just reviewing contracts and deal points constantly. For litigator, a lot of your time is in discovery. And that's true, small law, big law, but you are reviewing documents, synthesizing what they say. Maybe you're trying to do a privilege check and say, okay, this document we can't turn over. That's changed some actually with machine learning. The predictive coding has shrunk the amount of time that, junior associates are spent doing that. Legal research, fights with opposing counsel. You need to give us these documents. You're saying they're privileged, they're not privileged, that sort of thing. And then there's the smaller section on taking depositions, briefing things to court. So that's a very broad overview of those 6-minute increments. And yes, editing and reviewing and looking for hanging commas, hanging headers. That was always the bane of my existence, was forgetting that there was a hanging header and getting yelled at for it.
That sounds bad. The economics of a big law firm, it feels like this very big pyramid structure, which I think is replicated in many industries around the world, probably in finance to some extent, and then I think even academia to some extent. But talk to us a little bit about how that value accrues to the entire firm and the partners and the distribution of the fees that the clients are paying.
Right. So you have what they call leverage in a law firm. So you have equity partners. Some firms have equity partners and income partners who don't actually own a share of the firm. But the partners are trying to get leverage on the associate. So 1 partner to, say, 4 associate ratio. All of the big law firms basically pay the exact same amount to their associates. This is called the Cravath scale. If you can look it up, and it'll say a third-year associate makes $250,000 and gets this bonus each year. Let's just say for the average associate bills $700 an hour and is expected to bill about 2,000 hours a year. So they're generating $1.4 million for the firm in revenue in terms of billed out, and they're getting paid, I'd say, with taxes and everything, $500,000. So the partners are making $900,000 for every extra associate. So if you have a 4-to-1 leverage, 900,000 profits per partner, 3.6 million. And that's how they're trying to think of it. And the big partners, the rainmakers, are the ones who can generate enough work to support those associates.
Got it.
And if you can't support those associates, your leverage goes down, your profits go down, you might have to lay people off, that sort of thing.
It's nice to be a partner at big law. But on that note, so my understanding, at least in corporate law, is that it is harder to make partner nowadays than it used to be. And this is part of the reason why it's a miserable experience, because it used to be in the past, you work really, really hard, basically give up your life for 2 decades or whatever, and then you get rewarded with a huge salary and you don't have to do as much of the grunt work. Your job is basically sourcing deals and making the intros and stuff like that. Do you get that impression as well on your side?
I definitely see from the outside that it seems harder to make partner. I think that's led to more people leaving earlier to do their own firms. I think it's easier than ever to start your own firm. And
why is that?
For me, for example, I didn't need an office when I started. I started in January of 2021. I had a desk at at another law firm that collected mail. I think the number of services are just easier to access. Even things like, now if you really wanted to cut, you could start with a cheaper legal research service than Westlaw, things like that. I think, and you've seen it in the business creation numbers. I think you see a lot of professional services, splitting off from firms. But I definitely think it's harder to make partner. They've added this income partner level, so you make partner, but you're not an equity member of the firm. I think
consolation prize.
That's right, and you get to shop the title. I think is the other reason. So let's say you want to go in-house somewhere. Now you're a partner at this firm, and you can say you're a partner at the firm, even if you haven't bought in. But I think that structure has been around longer. Honestly, it feels like the same thing as in academia. It's harder to get tenure now. It's just the ladder's getting pulled up, I guess, in these sort of industries.
Would anyone go into a big law firm if they knew in advance that they wouldn't make partner? Like like the angel of the future comes to them in a dream and says, you know what, you're not going to make partner. Would that still be worthwhile, or is the prospect, even if it's declining, of making partner, is that crucial towards that decision? If you knew in advance you weren't going to make it, would anyone make that decision?
So they do have staff attorneys at big law firms that are people who are not on partner track.
Okay.
And
those are fine careers?
And they're fine careers. I think people, but they also have less expectation of how much they're going to work. You typically wouldn't do it. And the reason they have this up or out sort of system at the big law firms is because the prospect of being partner drives you to bill 2,000, right? 2,500 hours, how many it is you're showing, how hard
it's the light at the end of the tunnel, right?
That's right. So, I think, look, the training is really good. The cases are really interesting. Like, I actually quite enjoyed some of it, but that pressure to bill and work is you probably wouldn't want that.
When you say training, like, I don't, like, what's the deal? Like, in law school, you don't even learn about any of the things you actually do as a lawyer?
You certainly learn, how to think about the law, but you're not learning and you have a legal writing class. Because I think
this is actually important for the AI component of, like, okay, how do you actually learn to be a lawyer? If you don't really do it in law school, and then, AI is going to take over more and more of these functions, like where do you learn, right? So what is the learning process?
Here's an example. You don't learn how to have a dispute about discovery in law school.
Okay.
I sent out discovery demands. You owe me documents, right? In the American system of law, you end up in a lawsuit, and each side is obligated to exchange documents with each other. And you send out demands and you ask for a certain category of documents, and they come back and say, we're not going to give them to you. That request was overly burdensome, or they're not relevant.
Or they say they lost them.
Or they say they lost them, and you have to have a fight about getting the documents. What keywords did you search? Who did you collect documents from? All of those sorts of things. And how to have that dispute, how to make the request so you don't get the denial, those sorts of things. And what the writing looks like and feels like, you just don't get in law school. You just and even writing a brief and what's a persuasive brief, the edits, those sorts of things. You learn how to do legal writing, but it's just you can't do it until you're doing it.
Got it.
Okay, so on that note, I mean, AI seems possibly most at home replicating the work done by, say, a mildly competent, maybe not too tired junior associate. And historically, you do that work for many years and you build foundational skills of being a lawyer, like attention to detail and issue spotting and I guess risk triage and that sort of thing. If those tasks, those formational tasks, are now outsourced to AI, what do you see as the impact on junior lawyers?
It's a great question. I think it's going to be hard for junior lawyers at big law firms to get their sort of that training. On the other hand, it may just be that they are doing more work. And so on the same things, but more efficiently, maybe they're now going to have more fights about documents and less time spending reviewing the documents. Maybe they can increase the volume of things they demand, that sort of thing. I certainly think that the leverage model and the build hour model is going to run into some difficulty. It'll also make their lives easier, just in terms of, as an example, you get discovery requests. I talk about discovery a lot because it's truly a lot of the work of being a lawyer, but they come, the other side will send you a PDF with a bunch of demands, and then you've got to respond to the demands. And even just the moment where you have to convert the PDF into a Word document and start editing the Word document is like the true bane of my existence. And I've actually started using this AI program.
Which one?
It's called BriefPoint AI. Okay. And it's also very templated, right? So you're constantly trying to find templates. Hey, other associate in this law firm, can you send me, a previous document? Now they have, 80 different objections that you're used to making, and they convert them, and it's a lot more point and click. And of course, you have to know what you're doing when you're, that these objections are valid, but just the document formatting and getting it through and it looked to look good and not have to fight with Microsoft Word for 3 hours is really valuable.
I realize I should have asked this earlier, but when we say AI, what does that actually entail in the legal field? Because as you point out, I mean, templates, standard forms, those sort of things have been around forever. And a lot of law firms already use template software to quickly duplicate work or make document packages or whatever. So when we talk about AI in law, what exactly would that be?
I think it can be a lot of things. One, it can be making that template process a lot faster. And, that will free up labor time for sure. The ChatGPT's O3 Pro is doing legal research now that is quite excellent.
This is really important. People who think that O3 is dumb or is a hallucination machine are not, or that ChatGPT have not used O3.
That's my view. And there's this professor at Georgetown. I think his name is Danny Welsh Townsend, who's just sort of every time a new model has been coming out has been running sort of exam questions that he gives to his students. I think it's in his federal courts class about, how they do on each of these questions. And when O3 came out, not even O3 Pro, when O3 came out, it it answered them all, some of them excellently, and even got it's called an issue spotter question. So it wasn't on the face of the question. It was an appellate jurisdiction question. If you really were thinking hard about it as a student, you would have noticed this issue that he wasn't asking about explicitly, but there might not have been jurisdiction to even bring the appeal that he prompted you about. And O3 caught that. And when I've used it, you hear a lot of these cases, lawyers getting sanctioned because they're, submitting things with hallucinated cases. And
there's some funny examples of that.
They're amazing. And the thing I think to myself is, you would never submit as a partner at a law firm, you'd never submit whatever the junior associate just turned over to you. Sometimes they didn't understand the case exactly right. And so that's the job is checking the cases. Shepherdizing is the I think the Lexis term for it. And making sure the cases stand for what they say, that they're still valid precedent. That's the job of being a lawyer. And now I can rely on O3 to start some of the research for me, point me to the cases, and it's citing to the cases. And this is without access to Bloomberg Law or Thomson Reuters or anything like that. I assume it's coming. And once it's going to be integrated with those databases of cases, right now it's just trawling the internet. I think it's going to do a fantastic job. And you spend so much time as a lawyer, as a litigator, thinking of the Boolean search terms for Lexis, and, or, these sorts of things. And you don't know the exact term that's going to come up in the case, what all of the precedent use this term. And not having to think about that, I can run it in the background as I'm doing another task. And for 20 minutes, and something comes back from O3, it's got the 5 cases that I need to dig in and find the right language to then go on Lexis and then to chase it down.
I've been using O3 more for just sort of my own intellectual questions from time to time.
Your own lawsuits?
No, I haven't done any. I haven't started any lawsuits yet. But this is really the way that I've been using it, which is that it's a fantastic tool for just discovering the existing research that's out there. I was looking at something. I was curious about trade barriers within China between provinces, something like that. There is a lot of research that's been done on the question of okay, if each of these provinces has some motivation to promote their champions, is there any tension? This is something it found all of this, it had the links to the academic research that's been about it. It had summaries of them. The summaries may have been wrong, but I'm not going to copy and paste summaries and present it as my work. I can click on it. Most of the time they are pretty correct. So what you say in terms of just even being able to find the relevant case law, et cetera, seems extremely powerful and time saving.
It's truly been life-changing for me.
Wow.
I like doing legal research. I like getting into the cases, but just if there's a new issue and you just don't know where to start, that it was always, I think, for a junior associate, where do I start?
Yeah.
And I think it will make their life easier in that regard, even if it might also make their lives, hard.
Okay, time saving, making associates' lives easier. That sounds great from a personal perspective. But what does that actually mean for billable hours? Because, of course, the whole business model seems to rely on eking out as much work, as many billable hours as possible, right? And that includes grunt work, which theoretically could be done by AI now. And I'm not sure big law or any law is going to be necessarily incentivized to use AI if it means a reduction in billable hours. I suppose they could make it up in volume. Maybe that's the idea. They can take on more cases, but is that the expectation?
They might be able to make it up in volume. I do think things like, they call them, alternate fee arrangements are going to become more popular. We get a flat fee of, let's say, $5 million to do this deal for you or something like that.
And then you're incentivized to do it in the fewest hours possible.
That's right.
Keep going. Yeah.
So that's one possibility, that the model just changes. The billable hour, it stops being the model. The other thing is, the way it works right now is, it's been a while for me. So, the big partners, let's say they're billing out at $2,000 an hour or $1,500 an hour, and the associates are $700 an hour. I think in a lot of ways, what the client is paying for is really like $5,000 an hour for the partner and $400 or $300 for the associate, but it just gets billed out differently. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing is that partners might just accrue a lot more of the value with fewer associates. They still have the billed hours. They're just a lot more efficient. And, in particular, I think for general counsels who are hiring at the big law firms, they're hiring for safety. Nobody ever got fired for hiring Cravath. It's sort of like a way to think about this, or a big law firm. If something goes wrong, you want to have hired the best lawyer you could and say to your board or your CEO, look, I hired a great law firm and they just missed it. But look, everybody agrees this is a great law firm, which is all to just say that I think one possibility here is the billed hour remains, but all the value accrues to the top lawyers.
Yeah. I mean, that seems like it'll have implications. We should talk about that further. Something I have done is I'll take transcripts of Odd Lots, and afterwards, I'll do a little self-criticism session where I'll say, where could we have pressed this? Where were the weaknesses in the guest's answer? Where should we have pressed further and harder? What were some of the logical flaws? What would you have done differently, et cetera? And sometimes I've found that to be useful. Have you been able to use AI for essentially building better arguments or finding weaknesses in an argument or anything like that yet?
I haven't done that yet. I'm sure I will. I have used it for taking audio and making it into transcripts. Yeah. I mean, that's just like a foundational thing for me. Prison will produce an audio of a hearing or something like that, and I need the transcript and I need to just read it instead of listening to it for 40 minutes. But self-criticism,
but it does sound like you mentioned the issue spotter question, like actually being able to identify real legal questions,
not just identify precedent.
Not just identify precedent, but actually logical sequences, or where it sounds like that's what you're getting at.
I'm sure it is coming, and I think as I as the models get better and I have to produce a brief and maybe I can start running it through. Yeah. Of course, lawyers all have huge confidentiality concerns with everything they do. So I'm very careful about what I'm putting into GPT. And
you got to run your own DeepSeek instance.
I think that's right. And I think the big law firms are having sort of servers on site with their own models, but those models aren't as good as O3 yet. Yeah. And so I think as you can start to have great models in-house on your own servers, that's going to really be the thing that launches it. I can't do that because it's just me, and I'm not going to host a server farm. But I do know, the new Apple chips on these very nice, newest, they can run, things like Llama very well. And so it's coming. But I think for the top models, I'm sort of reluctant to put everything up there.
That makes sense.
This is exactly what I was going to ask next, which is how do clients feel about AI in the legal industry? Because I imagine, nobody ever got fired for hiring Cravath, as you mentioned, or some other magic circle law firm. But on the other hand, if Cravath is now using AI, I imagine on the client side, maybe there's some concern over having their material contracts or employee data or financing documents or whatever getting uploaded to offsite servers. And then there's also the question of what if AI just makes a mistake? Although, as you pointed out, no partner would ever submit something done by a junior associate without actually reviewing it first. So maybe that's not as much of an issue. But are there any qualms, I guess, coming from the client side that you see?
So I can't speak to the big law as much anymore.
Sure.
And it's very different, I think, on my side. And I think, my clients their qualms are much sort of bigger in terms of privacy and much more, focused on the government and are wanting to get just the best representation they can. So, but for example, I'm getting medical records from my clients a lot. That's a lot of the job of a plaintiff side lawyer, is documenting injuries, things like that. And they're certainly concerned about their medical privacy. And so I can't, use AI yet to take the medical records and condense them into, the quick summaries. But those programs, I'm sure, are coming where, there's privacy and security and all of the things. They probably exist already. I'm just not using them yet to make that part feasible. I am sure that, if you are Goldman Sachs and you hire a big law firm and they've been doing your deals or your IPOs, such as they exist right now, and you don't want the law firm training on your documents to go use them in other deals, I'm sure this is an issue. On the other hand, it might reduce your legal costs by half, and you can fight about that. And so, what they're willing to do, I don't know.
Let's extend forth some of these economic questions, because allowing the senior partners to accrue more value by not needing to allocate as many hours to the junior lawyers, that makes total sense for this specific generation, right? Because, okay, some people are lucky enough to have made partner before AI, and then other people are going to be in this situation in which their value maybe could be done more cheaply or for a few hours. But 10 years from now, whatever, a lot of those partners are going to be retired, et cetera. Like, what is the downstream consequence of your view, of some of these shifts that are happening right now? Because, eventually all the partners, eventually everyone's going to die and there's going to be a new, like, where does this go? Like, what are the consequences?
So I think that the skills that will be valued in lawyers are just going to change a lot. The interpersonal skills of client management, walking your client through the risks that they have. They're nervous, they're getting sued. These are the company litigations. The lawyers who can make them feel safe and let them understand what's happening to them and what their odds are, those sorts of things. The lawyers who are great at taking depositions and the lawyers who are great at oral argument, those skills are going to go up and up, I think, in skill, in value. And the skill of legal research or just being great at writing a brief, I do think that that's going to get maybe not the 99th percentile brief writing, the people who are going to the Supreme Court and who are just truly excellent, maybe that will take time. But the sort of grunt work, solid junior associate, mid-level associate, senior associate who are writing the briefs, that I question whether that skill will have the same value. But there's a lot of interpersonal skill that matters a lot for being a lawyer, and that's going to go up in value.
Now, a question with any new technology is, because one argument is clear, okay, there's an X amount of demand for legal services, and there's an X amount of people who supply them, and maybe you save some money. Could the market for legal services grow such that if capacity to do legal research and some of this other stuff gets cheaper, that there are more areas? It's like, oh, you know what? Maybe this is worth filing a lawsuit
Lawsuits
over.
everywhere. This was actually going to be my question as well, but particularly for poor plaintiffs who normally can't afford a lawyer, what do they call them? Indigent,
and they sometimes will file pro se on their own behalf.
Or maybe more lawyers like you take other cases that in 5 years ago, the economics wouldn't have made sense, but today the economics made sense. Like, could it just be, Jevons paradox, but for law?
I think that's absolutely going to happen. I can just sort of walk through the economics
Great.
of one of my cases. Somebody comes in and they say they had a false arrest case against the NYPD and they spent, let's say, 5 hours in custody. We sort of know what the expected value of that case is. You're doing, what chance do you have to win, and what are the damages you are going to get when you win? And I can and then I a contingency fee, typically a third in New York. And you can sort of do that math of the expected value of the case and then think about how many hours it's going to take to win that case or get to a settlement. And if I'm using AI to make myself more productive in my research, the number of hours that I'm expecting to put into that case goes down. Suddenly my hurdle rate for what it takes to take on that case has gone down, and I can take on more cases for the same number of hours. And so that I definitely think is coming. It's also the case that, and because of that, because lawyers have to think in that term of, how much is it going to cost me to do this case in terms of labor, there are a lot of cases brought pro se. In the court system right now, I think it's like 25% of cases are from pro se litigants.
These are the people who represent
themselves because they can't afford a lawyer, or, my cases are contingency. People aren't paying out of pocket, but so I can't afford to take on the case because the damages aren't potentially high enough. That's how I have to sort of think about it. And so I think there's going to be a lot more representation of those people. It's also the case probably that pro se lawyers are going to start getting better. That, you said you were doing research on your own, with O3. It's possible that, if it was just a little dispute with somebody over some amount of money, you might think I can do this myself rather than trying to go find a lawyer. And so, but for legal aid, for people who are criminal defense attorneys at legal aid, those attorneys I think are about to go on because of how overworked they are and underpaid they are. They might get a lot more efficient and be able to represent a lot more people.
Tracy, I'm imagining a lot of very annoyed judges by like pro se
frivolous lawsuits.
No,
right?
I mean like someone who did their own research, because nothing's more annoying than someone who does their own research, and then they're like citing all these cases that they learned about yesterday and stuff like that. Like it just seems like you have a high potential for obnoxious people who think they know everything.
No. You're democratizing case law.
Okay,
that's what I say.
I want to be clear. They're already getting that. The judges are getting a lot of it, especially pro se prisoners who get to spend a lot of time in the legal library and are filing cases. And some of them are excellent, but sometimes they're not so good. I clerked for a federal judge, and we saw a lot of this litigation, a lot of it pro se. I don't know that they're providing AI access in prisons, unfortunately, in terms of litigation. But I actually think there are going to be a lot of annoyed judges because this is going to happen. It also might be the case that it raises the floor of. You see a lot of bad legal writing, even from lawyers, and I could see it actually getting a little bit easier to be a judge and a clerk.
If everything becomes more volume oriented, or the business model becomes more about the volume rather than the billable hours, do you see a situation where, I guess, the emphasis on sourcing deals in corporate law or sourcing cases in plaintiff, does that become more important? Like that's the skill set that you actually need, that sort of like matchmaker process? I
think that yes, I think finding the deals, making the economics of the relationship work is going to go up a lot in value. I think it's already the case. You all see legal advertisements for personal injury lawyers everywhere all the time.
Pain law, yo.
It's so. I mean, legal search terms on Google are the most expensive cost per click. I mean, these thousands of dollars for cost per click. Case acquisition, I think, might go up even more because if you can just get the case in, and you're working less on the case, but you're still getting your third contingency fee, you might be willing to pay even more and more to just generate this volume. I mean, already mills exist. They call them, plaintiffs' mills, people who are doing, 600 cases per, every couple attorneys or something like that. The economics of that and just acquiring the case are going to go, I think, way, way up until maybe they start competing on price because they can do so much more volume.
I want to talk about advertising. Hey, Tracy or Joel, have either of you heard the radio ads for Top Dog Law?
Yes.
I have not.
Every listener, go to YouTube and just type top dog law ad. They're the most incredible, aren't they, Joel? Like, they're really incredible.
Yes.
Like, just go search right now or when the episode is and listen to some of these ads. Do you buy ads on Google?
I've done some Google ad campaigns. I haven't really.
This is actually another topic we're interested in.
But a lot of plaintiff side civil rights lawyers are buying space. It's just not how I've chosen to compete. I do more referrals from defense lawyers, that sort of thing. But I mean, I actually have started to think about, right, we know this stuff about young people are starting to use ChatGPT and other services as their sort of portal to the internet. They're using it for search. And so, right, all of these law firms spend a lot on SEO. But what is SEO in a generative AI world is sort of an interesting question. What are the engines turning up in terms of search terms? What do you have to have on your website in order to get people to find you through GPT rather than Google?
Yeah.
Is LexisNexis doing anything with AI?
They are. I have not really used their AI products, Lexis, and I know Westlaw is doing the same. I use Lexis. I assume Bloomberg Law, which is doing something similar. But right now, the models that they're using just aren't as good as O3. It's basically, and so if you're still calling to a 4 era GPT or similar from Claude or whatever, that sort of quality, I just don't think that they're getting good enough research. I think it really was whatever that step change was to O3's level, I think has made the research so much better that I just use it and then I'll go look at all the cases on Lexis.
The difference in what you can actually learn from 4.0 or whatever, 4.0, the naming convention, versus O3, it really is a very big deal. And I think like a lot of people formed impressions pre-O3 impressions. What other tools are out there that are interesting or that come across your world, whether it's like, I mean, we've been talking a lot about O3 and you mentioned that other one, Brief, something. Is there anything else out there that's exciting or interesting or promising?
There's one I looked at that looked promising. It's like Iqdis or IQIDIS, something like that. And they looked pretty interesting in terms of sort of being full suite and wraparound. There's Harvey AI, but they're really focused on big law firms. But I know that they're working with a lot of big firms. But, the technology, for me that looks promising would be people where I can safely upload medical records and get, instead of trawling through 200, 300 pages, just like what was each progress note? What did it say? What's the injury? That sort of thing. And I think that's coming. There are, I think it may be something from Casetext that summarizes depositions. And of course, that's another thing where I've tried to use it in the past and it wasn't very good. I think just the context windows that they were able to use haven't been sufficiently large. But I think with RAG and with better models, I think that will get better and better. Like this is the Ben Thompson line of "this is the worst they're ever going to be." Is something that I'm constantly trying to think about because I've used these products in the past or tested them and they haven't been very impressive. But I also used 4.0 and wasn't very impressed at its legal research and have seen that jump. And so I assume, in terms of taking depositions and getting concise summaries of the most important facts for your case, that's going to get a lot better. I just think the products aren't there yet. And maybe because the API calls for the LLMs just aren't to their newest models yet, or it's too expensive. But I assume that's getting cheaper Moore's Law still applies.
If you had to put actual money on this question, would you say there will be more or less lawyers, say, 10 years from now?
As a percentage of the population.
Yeah. That's a great question.
Thank you for the caveat, Joe. That's important.
And I hadn't thought about this one. I would bet on fewer, but not that much. I would say I don't think this is going to wipe out lawyers. I think fewer and what they do will change a lot.
Could you imagine? Tech people are obsessed with the mythical, who will be the first person to have $1 billion startup with no employees? Could that be like, okay, you hung a shingle out, I think is a phrase that sometimes people use. Could you imagine a mega firm with one employee?
I could
A
imagine
mega lawyer with no,
so you think of Celino and Barnes, those sorts of firms, these big plaintiffs law firms.
Yeah.
I
many
think
employees do they have? Yeah.
that I actually don't know, but it's a lot, and it's all across the country. But so much of what they do is make the discovery demand, respond to the demands, do get the medical records, send out a settlement demand letter, negotiate with the opposing counsel or the carrier from the insurer. My client has a torn rotator cuff and a torn meniscus or something like that from this car accident, and they have an exact expected value of the case, and it's just negotiating that. And I think they could go from let's say 100 cases per attorney to 1,000 or to 2,000 because they could set up an automated workflow a lot easier, I think. And so, that person could start making 50 million or 100 million a year per one lawyer than the already 5 million that they're making or something like that, these top firms.
One last little question. I mentioned you're a poker player. In poker, big thing has been the emergence of solvers, and you go back and you look at did you play it very well? But it's all about what you described of you calculate your EV, right? And did you play it right? And you don't always win, and you may have calculated EV right, and you took on the case, but you don't get the outcome. How scientific is that? The calculating EV on a given case, and is there technology that's working on that?
So it's not very scientific at all. It's you can assess liability, I think, pretty reasonably. Is this going to be something where we're definitely going to win? The personal injury car accident lawyers who say, the police report says this person made an illegal left turn. Perfect liability. I'm going to win instantly. And then you're just evaluating the damages. One thing I've actually explored is looking into whether LLMs can estimate the damages based on the injuries that you describe pretty well. Go through the case law where there's cases, this is called remittitor cases, where you might hear this person got $100 million for their hot coffee or whatever, these sort of classic cases, and a judge will knock it down. They'll say this case with this injury is only worth this much. But you could take all that language and start to estimate, quantify, because words are numbers with these programs. You could start to quantify what are the injuries worth in the case law, and then multiply that by. So I think that sort of thing is going to get a lot more scientific, and they're going to use it on the carrier side. So Geico is going to be able to say, you've described these injuries. We have a database of 1,000 cases just like this, and this was what we, and then you could haggle, well, this is a great plaintiff or something like that, and they're super sympathetic and, have that negotiation. But I think that process of evaluating the exact value of an injury or of a case is going to get a lot more scientific and facilitate settlements to happen quicker.
I imagine AI might be especially useful in class action lawsuits as well, where you're dealing with finding thousands of people potentially to attach to a case and then actually contacting them and getting information from them.
That seems reasonable to me. Also, in the class action cases, you just got a volume of data that you have to do discovery on. But it hadn't occurred to me. But, I do know that sometimes class actions start because somebody finds a Reddit thread and they see on Reddit, people are all complaining about this same issue with this product or something like that. And the lawyers, reach out to them. And so it is entirely plausible. I could see that.
That's
happening.
Another thing where you could have AI just trawling the internet for possible cases.
I think so. Or, what are people posting about on Twitter? What are they all getting harmed by? I don't know. So it seems entirely plausible.
Since you mentioned it, I just want to say, you mentioned illegal lefts, and Tracy and listeners, I had a issue last year where I'm not going to get into it, but it involved taking an illegal left turn.
Joe's a criminal.
I'm not. But
were you found innocent?
I am not a criminal, thanks to a referral that our guest here, Joel, helped make for me. I'm not going to say it. We're not going to talk any more about the case. It was super annoying. I'm not going to say anything more, but I just want to, it's my disclosure for this episode. So, Joel Wertheimer, thank you so much for coming on Odd Laws. That was fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
Tracy, before we talk about conclusions, I must press upon listeners again to search for top dog law firm ads. In fact, after we do this episode, we walk back to our desk, Tracy, I'm going to insist that you watch a few of them.
I love that your priority for this episode, the one thing you must get out of this episode is listening to top dog ads.
No, I swear,
That's
I was driving. I was
advertising.
in an Uber home several months ago, and this ad came on the radio, and there's like nothing I had ever heard in my entire life. Nothing will prepare you for this law firm's ads. Anyway, we could talk
I am
about
very
this.
intrigued.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a fantastic conversation.
Yeah.
One thing I am wondering is, in the U.S., there's a lot of talk about an overly litigious society. And I kind of wonder if AI is potentially just going to make it worse.
It sounds very plausible to me that it will make it worse, or better or worse. But I think, it does. My guess is that there's going to be some sort of, Jevons paradox thing where some existing labor will get really cheap or maybe completely unnecessary. And then the optimistic version is that defendants or people without a lot of money get better quality representation. It feels like it's not going to, it's going to probably have very big distributional and qualitative shifts on the industry.
Yeah, and this is the thing I'm also wondering. So, okay, junior associates, maybe they're doing less work, maybe they're slightly happier, but I guess the idea that more of the value just accrues to the partners at a time when it's harder to become partner, that seems to be the downside if you're going into the legal profession, right?
No, totally. It feels like we're at this moment, and this applies to a lot of actually AI economics questions, and we should definitely do more on them, where people imagine, or people maybe even rightly surmise, that there'll be a lot of benefits for existing holders of wealth, or companies can do layoffs, right? And I don't know the degree to that which is really happening, but at least in theory, and there's going to be firing of junior workers, et cetera. But that's a temporary condition. Because, first of all, a company saves a bunch of money by firing what eventually becomes characterized as grunt work. Well, what do they spend that money on, right? Because that's savings. And so do they invest it? Does that turn into consumption for the partners? There are a lot of, people's it's going to be mass layoffs. But I never find these questions really satisfying because the money doesn't disappear. It's someone's savings, and someone's savings either becomes someone's consumption or someone's investment, and anyone's consumption or investment becomes someone else's income. So therefore, thinking through some of these next level things, I think is really important. And AI clearly seems like ground zero. And I do think O3 is really good. And everyone needs to check it out and update their views if they haven't yet on the quality of the research you can do.
It does sound like it's maybe solved the hallucination problem that everyone was making fun of earlier.
Yeah, I mean, they're still there for sure, but because you can actually find links to documents and stuff like that, the speed with which you can get up to speed on anything is very impressive.
All right, I'm going to go test it. Shall we leave it there?
Let's leave it there.
This has been another episode of the Odd Lots podcast. I'm Tracy Alloway. You can follow me at Tracy Alloway.
And I'm Joe Weisenthal. You can follow me at The Stalwart. Follow our guest on Blue Sky, Joe Wertheimer. He's at Worthwhile. Follow our producers, Carmen Rodriguez at Carmen Armand, Dashiell Bennett at Dashbot, and Cale Brooks at Cale Brooks. For more Odd Lots content, go to Bloomberg.com/oddlots, where we have a daily newsletter and all of our episodes. And you can chat about all of these topics 24/7 in our Discord. We even have an AI channel in there.
And if you enjoy Odd Lots, if you like it when we talk about the impact of AI on various professions, then please leave us a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. And remember, if you are a Bloomberg subscriber, you can listen to all of our episodes absolutely ad-free. All you need to do is find the Bloomberg channel on Apple Podcasts and follow the instructions there. Thanks for listening.